Hello, boys and girls. Welcome back. We have a fun class for you today. This, I anticipate being a little bit of a shorter video than usual because there is so much great music that I want you to listen to. As far as the, historical facts and things are concerned, I want to keep it slightly brief so that you have plenty of time to listen to all the great music from these two composers that we're going to listen to today. Two of my favorite Baroque composers and two of my favorite composers in general. Um, I think you'll really enjoy their work. You're probably already familiar with some of their work, but we'll get into, I'll put some examples that you probably are familiar with, but also some examples that you may not be familiar with. Um, yeah, so remember, we want to be taking notes during this, and you have to submit your notes after you're done watching this video. And then what you have to do is after you submit the notes, or before, I guess, I would submit the notes first and then do this after. Make sure you listen to all of these examples, okay? Really great music, and really good examples to help put you into that time period. This is one thing that's unique in music. Maybe some other things are like this too, like art, like visual art, where you can listen to this music and then be transported back to the 17th and 18th centuries, listening to music with, doing our best to listen to the music with their ears, okay? And really appreciating it that way as it would have been heard back then. You can do this with art too, right? If you go to a museum, if you're ever allowed to do that again, and look at a painting or work of art, and then normally we'll have a little thing on the wall that says the name of the picture and the artist, and it will give some background. To read that and then to look at that painting, portrait, sculpture, whatever it may be, and to really try to understand where the artist was, try to understand historically what was going on around that time period. It will really help you to fully grasp and appreciate art and music like maybe you never have before. And it will take you to a place where if you find this to be somewhat boring, or maybe you just don't get it, right? That will really help you to, if it's not something that will jump right off the screen. In other words, this might not be something that you'll find yourself listening to in your spare time, but at the very least, you'll gain an appreciation for it. I feel like we say that all the time, but who really knows what it means? So yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I just had to look because Mrs. DeJoseph is video calling me now. Let's move on to the next page and we'll see what she... Hello, Mrs. DeJoseph, how are you? How's it going?
Okay.
I'm in a class right now. I'm recording a video for my students.
I'm sorry.
It's
'Cause
okay.
I think our son needs help.
Our son is on the loose. He's supposed to be taking a nap, but he's on the loose. We hear him running all about the house. All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to talk about Vivaldi now. So you have fun with that, and I'll help when I can. Okay. I love you so much. Bye bye. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. These things. This is part of the fun of virtual learning from the teacher end. Sometimes these things pop up. Well, in any case, let's talk about Antonio Vivaldi, wonderful composer from Italy, born in 1678 and lived until 1741. In addition to being a composer, a lot of people don't know all this stuff about Vivaldi, but in addition to being a composer, he was a virtuoso violinist. If you don't know what a virtuoso is, this is a word that we've used in the past, but a virtuoso is someone who is like a master at their craft. So in addition to being a great composer, he was also like one of the best violin players like ever. Okay. He was also the head music teacher at a school for orphaned girls. Okay, so a lot of the choral music that Vivaldi wrote, especially the ones that he wrote that were for all-girl choirs, he wrote that for the students at the school where he was the head music teacher. And most people don't realize, or they forget, that Vivaldi was also, in addition to all of this, he was also a Catholic priest. What? Crazy, man. Talk about a like a jack of all trades, right? This guy was cooking with gas. He wrote over 500 different concerti. Now, concerti is the plural for concerto, and a concerto is a multi-movement work for a solo instrument with orchestral accompaniment. So if I could write a concerto for violin, like Vivaldi, for example, most of his concerti were for violin. I would have the violin be my solo instrument, and then everything else would be the backup. Like all the other instruments would be backing up the violin. So he wrote over 500 different concerti for all sorts of instruments, basically every kind of instrument that was around back in his time. But most of his concerti are for violin. He wrote a lot of different violin concerti. And they are all very, very difficult to play. Now, remember, Vivaldi was a virtuoso violinist, so when he's writing music for other instruments to play, especially as soloists, he is going to expect the same of the performers as he does of himself. So he's going to write some very, very difficult music, and Vivaldi is kind of known for that, for writing these very, very difficult, technically difficult passages in his music. One of the best moments of classical music shade being thrown is, now I don't agree with the person who said this, but there was a composer in the 20th century, right? So we're talking like hundreds of years later. Composer in the 20th century who we'll talk about when we get to the modern age. His name was Igor Stravinsky. He was a Russian composer. Well, a Russian-born composer, but lived most of his life in France, and I think Los Angeles, in the U.S. too. Well, anyway, he one time he threw some shade at Vivaldi, and he said, "Get this, get ready for this burn." He said, "Vivaldi did not write 500 concerti. He wrote one concerto 500 times." Boom! Man, sick. Vivaldi, you want some ice for that burn? That was a sick burn. Now, for the record, I actually don't agree with that assessment of Vivaldi's music, but you know, he was a product of his time, and a lot of the music, he was using the conventions that were around at the time. And can you make a criticism that a lot of it sounds very similar? I suppose you can, but when you see just the amount of masterful compositions that Vivaldi came out with, it's like He wrote so much music, and so much of it is like so impressive. So um, I'll link some of his music below. Probably his most famous piece, I would say, is called The Four Seasons. The Four Seasons is a group of four different violin concerti. Okay, so it's four pieces combined into one, all for solo violin. And this is what we would call an early example of program music. Now, if you remember all the way back to 6th grade, we did a whole unit on program music. And you may remember that program music is music that is designed to tell a story. It's designed to paint a picture in the mind of the listener. And most of the program music that we get is from the 19th and 20th centuries, especially focused in the 19th century. So we're talking about the 1800s. So for Vivaldi to come out with this piece, The Four Seasons, this is conceptually, it is very ahead of its time. Program music was really not being written. And what Vivaldi did here was that he took each of these movements represents sonically, like sound-wise, it's supposed to represent a different season of the year, right? So spring, summer, winter, and fall. I didn't do them in order there, but you get the idea. And there are different elements in this piece that are supposed to paint certain pictures in your mind. For example, in the movement Spring, you hear this little technique in the violin that sounds very much like different birds chirping, okay? It sounds like bird songs. And that is supposed to represent in your mind, the sounds of birds. Like in springtime, all the birds come back out, right? So that's just one of many examples. So I'm going to link the Four Seasons down below. I suggest that you listen to as much of it as you can, because it's a very advanced piece for its time. A lot of people don't realize also that Vivaldi wrote many, 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 many different operas. Okay, couldn't quite find a number on how many, but many, many different operas. At the very least, dozens of operas. Okay, that's because at the time, opera was really the most popular form of musical entertainment. Realizing, of course, still that this is the, music like this was still reserved for the very elite in society, the upper crust, the rich. Okay. Opera houses were starting to become more public, but they were cost prohibitive. So you could really only afford to go there if you were, in like the noble class, if you were one of the upper echelon. But anyway, he wrote many different operas, and the arias in these operas. And by the way, we haven't gone over this yet. We will, in our next lesson, it's gonna be all about opera, and we'll learn all of the different terminology that we use in the opera world, like aria, for example. The aria, I'll go into more detail next time, but an aria in an opera is basically just a song that's in an opera. Okay, that's a very simple way to explain it. An aria is a song that's in an opera. They don't call them songs, they call them arias. So the arias in these operas are also extremely difficult to sing, just like his work for solo instruments, they're extremely difficult to play. So it takes a real virtuosic singer to be able to sing this music. I'm going to link below my favorite aria. Now, Vivaldi's operas they don't really get the that much love as far as like they're not very frequently performed anymore. So I haven't really heard many of his operas, but I've heard at least one aria from one of his operas, his opera Griselda. And the name of the aria is Agitata da due venti, and the best version that I've heard of this is sung by the Italian soprano Cecilia Bartoli, one of my favorites. You're gonna love her, I think. You'll see just how difficult this is to sing, and you'll also probably get a little bit of a chuckle because Cecilia makes some funny faces during this whole thing. Some of it is on purpose because, you know, acting, and some of it is like you need to. This is just trying to sing this music requires you to not really care about what your face looks like when you're singing. You just have to do what you have to do to get the right notes. It's that difficult. So check it out. Agitata da due venti from La Griselda. Okay. Anything else about Vivaldi? Let's move on to the GOAT, Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach. Okay. Actually, this might not be that short of a video after all. I'm realizing that. But anyway, let's talk about Bach. Born in 1685, died in 1750, and we know that musicologists like to use the year 1750 as the end date for the Baroque period because, number one, it is around the mid 18th century that the Baroque period comes to an end, but we use 1750 because it's hard to imagine the Baroque period carrying on after Bach, who's like the quintessential Baroque composer. Okay, when you think of the Baroque period, the first composer who should pop into your mind is Bach. He's that significant to the period. He is known as the greatest Baroque composer and one of, if not the greatest composer of all time. I would tend to say that he is. He wrote over 1,100 pieces of music, both religious and secular, and each one is just a masterpiece. So he wrote a large amount of music, but it's the quality combined with the quantity that is quite stunning when you look at Bach. He worked all throughout Germany. He never really left Germany. I think if you were to bring him back today and ask him what a regret of his would be, it would be that he never really left Germany. But he did work all throughout Germany, but specifically for the last 30 years of his life, he worked and lived in Leipzig, Germany, where he was the in German they would call it the Kapellmeister, which basically means he was in charge of the music at St. Thomas Lutheran Church. Okay, and Bach was a Lutheran. He had to compose new music every week. So this is part of the reason why he wrote so much, is because the people at St. Thomas Church really kind of expected there to be new music each and every week. So he was constantly writing new music. This included fugues and other organ music to play as processionals and recessionals. He also wrote all sorts of different choral music in 4-part harmony for during the service. And then he freelanced. He wrote secular music. At one point, he tried to get another job in Brandenburg, Germany. So he wrote 6 pieces, which are very famous nowadays, which are so-called the Brandenburg Concerti, right? Because the job was in Brandenburg. He didn't get that job actually because the head, the kind of the Duke there of Brandenburg, the Count, whatever he was, he wasn't really hiring a Kapellmeister, and Bach just kind of sent it to him on a lark, thinking, well, when he sees how great this music is, he'll have to hire me, and he didn't even listen to it. The 6 pieces that he wrote, the 6 concerti that he wrote, which are some of the greatest music of the Baroque period, were not performed during the Baroque period ever. They sat on this guy's desk for like 100 years until different historians and stuff happened to find it, and that's why we have it today. But it is really some great music. I'll put a section from my favorite of the Brandenburg Concerti, the Brandenburg Concerto number 2. That's my favorite. Let's see. He wrote basically in every available genre, right? They didn't have all the genres back then that we have now, but the ones that they did have, he wrote in, except for ballets and operas. He didn't write any operas. Would have been cool if he did. I would love to hear a Bach opera. But he wrote several different oratorios. Oratorios we mentioned last time are similar to operas in a few different ways. They have arias, they have what we call recitatives, which I'll explain what that is next time. But there is no they have characters, right? But there is no acting on stage, and most of the time it is religious music. So you could think of them as like religious operas that are not acted out. People stand in one spot and sing their part, and there's choruses and everything like that. But so I'll put some of those down. I'll put let's see, what will I put? I'll put a section from the Magnificat, which is actually my favorite oratorio by Bach. I'll put maybe I'll put something from the Christmas oratorio too. Yeah. So anyway, I think, like I said, I actually wanted this to be shorter than than it is, so you guys can listen to some of the music. So I'll just end it here, so you have time to listen. Stay tuned. Next time in our next class, we are going to learn all about Baroque opera and learn all the different terminology that will help us understand opera, not just in the Baroque period, but throughout the classical, romantic, and modern periods as well. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.